We've given the children everything they've ever wanted. Is this our reward? Secrecy? Not doing what we tell them? This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa.
And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is episode 15 of season 8, and we are following up our Master of Horror mini-series on Ray Bradbury by discussing his story, The Veldt.
So I am starting us off in our discussion today. And as Matt just mentioned, we are talking about a specific Ray Bradbury story as our follow-up to our last episode, which was about stories and books and adaptations by Ray Bradbury, or about Ray Bradbury's work that we enjoy. So today we're talking about The Veldt. I'll give a little bit of the pub history on this one, and then I guess I will give my impressions and kind of my history with the story, and then pass it off to Lisa and Matt to talk about their impressions. So The Veldt originally appeared as The World the Children Made in September 23rd, 1950. This was in the issue of the Saturday Evening Post. It was republished under the current name, The Veldt, in the 1951 anthology, The Illustrated Man, which is the version I read. Like, I have The Illustrated Man, so I just read it from that book. And there have been several radio and screen adaptations. I am not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure I have heard like one of the kind of classic radio drama versions of The Veldt in the past. Though I don't remember precisely when I first read The Veldt. I feel like it was probably as an adult. I was most likely in graduate school or just after graduate school when I first read it. I enjoyed it. I do like some creepy children in stories and books. We talked about Turn the Screw and other things on this podcast in the past. But the other thing about this is, like, it's not just creepy children. It's like the situation that the family's in that's creating these issues, I guess you would say. Because if you think about Lisa's introductory quote, there's also the idea of like children not being grateful for getting everything or anything they want. And so I'm sure we'll talk about that as well. I've actually taught The Veldt a few times. It's always gone over pretty well with students. They're pretty creeped out by it, regardless of where they see the horror or the fear aspects coming from. I always thought it was interesting because, I mean, you think the story came out in the Saturday Evening Post in 1950, and then even the current version, I guess, that we know was originally published in 1951. And in a way, you can see Bradbury, and I'm not saying he's the only person doing this at this time, but in the story, he's anticipating, if you're a Star Trek nerd, the idea of the holodeck, because we have this nursery that the children can play in, and they can go anywhere. The parents can use it and like go to Paris if they wanted to. Like, it's basically what we would think of now as virtual reality. We also have Bradbury's famous kind of happy homes, happy life homes that I think he calls them in his stories, where the homes basically do everything and take care of the people inside. So if you have enough money, you can afford to live in like a fully automated house, which I think in some ways kind of relates to the super kind of size, super fast increase we've seen in technology and AI and things like that. So I'm not saying these things are like completely like connect, like he's seen the future or whatever, but I think he definitely saw the possibilities of technology and the ways that it would be used in fiction and even in real life. And I don't know, I also feel like reading the story now and the time of life I'm in now and where we are, that it's also a really interesting meditation on how much technology we want in our life, what technology can do to us. So that in some ways seems just as scary, in a way, when you get to the end of the story, thinking about its implications for our future too. So those are some of my thoughts about The Veldt. Lisa, Matt, what are your impressions? Is this your first time reading it? What's your history with the story?
I guess I'll jump in next. It's not my first time reading this story. I read The Invisible Man in its Invisible Man, Illustrated Man, excuse me, in its entirety. But it has been a very long time since I've read it, so it was practically like I was um, reading it for the first time. My thoughts were a lot like yours. I definitely had like visions of a Star Trek-esque holodeck as kind of the way this particular nursery worked, and yeah, I definitely felt like something from the 50s and 60s with that idea of, I mean, this is really when we saw like this that huge jump in technology in terms of like the modern home, and technology is going to revolutionize the way we work and live and all of that. And in some ways, I kind of wish that we had gotten the future that the 50s and 60s were predicting, because, you know, robots were going to do everything for us and we were going to have so much leisure time. And instead, robots are doing some things for us, but we're all still working and miserable. But I definitely would say that, you know, Bradbury's take on this as well is that double-edged sort of technology, because this is definitely a when technology goes wrong type of story. And yeah, I mean, we're recording this in the year 2024. For the last year or so, AI has been pretty much the headline of so many news and technology related articles that I mean, I think it's a really interesting time to revisit this. Now, of course, the AI that we're talking about in real life is not quite the same as actual artificial intelligence, but I mean, this idea of removing things that people have to do on a daily basis, be it cooking eggs for yourself or writing lines of code. I mean, those we think that it will lead to a better future, but maybe there's a darker side to that as well.
Yeah, Matt, I kind of agree with your take on this, like something that feels, I don't know, to me, I'm wary of AI when people talk about AI. Especially, when you think of it as like what we're dealing with today with um obviously I'm a writer, um and it makes me nervous to think that uh, people can just, plug in a prompt on the internet and pull up something written. It concerns me for what's going to happen with like creativity in the future, and just the idea of writing being an art form, but also the sharing of ideas. It makes me worry about jobs in the future. I have some, and I have other, that's just like a small, like little look into like kind of my concern around AI. But when it's something like this, sometimes I think, oh, well, having things more automated isn't necessarily a negative thing. Like, I think about things I have in my house that are very automated, that even a few decades ago we could not have dreamed of. For instance, I have one of those, granted, it's a really old, like hand me down model that doesn't work really well anymore, but I have one of those like robot vacuums in my house that, which with 2 kids and 2 dogs, I love being able to push a button and watch it zoom around and think, okay, that's something I'm not doing. I'm always looking for things that I hope will make my life a little bit easier. We have coffee pots that you can just kind of push a button and suddenly a pot of coffee appears or a cup of coffee appears. Things like that I think are amazing. Things that just make things more of a push of a button. I do think I'm very intrigued by that. And for some reason in my head, I don't think of those things as being as sinister as something like AI, right? But then you've got to think there's also this whole world of like automation that we're not really considering the impact of. And I think that's where I really like something like this story, because on the surface, I think the happy home that's kind of described in this story, like if somebody were to hand that to me now, I would think, yeah, I'd be really into that. A place where I didn't have to cook or clean, where everything is done for me, where I could, set it up. Yeah, that sign me up. And even the like, we're going to get into the story, but like the children's nursery, this place that's created for them, even that on the surface doesn't concern me as much, because my kids play a lot with like augmented reality. They have the things that you put over their heads and they can play video games that way, and I play video games that way with them. Like it's fun. And I've never really been concerned that they're going to, you know, have their reality somehow confused or anything like that. So yeah, it's kind of one of those things. I was like, oh man, that sounds awesome. Not having to cook, not having to clean. But this story goes so dark so quickly. Reading it definitely reminds me of like a Black Mirror episode, which I think there are several different episodes I was thinking of that this reminds me kind of how sinister that is. In particular, that one Christmas episode that John Hamm was in. This story reminds me of that. Just the way it deals with how we all want this like automated world that makes our lives easier, but we're not thinking about the human toll it's actually taking or what it's taking from us. So yeah, this will always be one of my favorite Bradbury stories.
I think both of you are making really interesting points and connecting it to now. And I was thinking while you were talking, Lisa, and when you ended up there, I feel like this story is showing us how, like you said, on the surface level, yeah, I mean, I think it would be nice if I didn't have to clean my house, if I didn't have to um, like cook for myself, if my house when I was agitated would rock me in a chair. It's very almost like, I don't know, womb like, I guess is too extreme, but the mother says at one point when she's saying she feels like she's been replaced, she says the house is wife and mother now and nursemaid. um she's like, basically, I can't give a bath to the children as efficiently or quickly as the automatic scrub bath can. I can't put the children to bed like I used to. They all seem very isolated. And of course, the children are spoiled and are going around doing whatever they want and don't like it when people say no to them. And then they kind of sublimate their anger to the parents into the nursery by playing out various violent scenarios with the lions. And then, of course, you have the weird part of the story that this holodeck safeties are off, and there's a real danger to the parents. But I think, going off of what you were saying toward the end of your response there, Lisa, is that at the heart of this is not just convenience. It's when technology takes something from us, or we put almost too much reliability or responsibility onto technology. I think now of people who like want to take like vacations from their phone, or people finding correlations between our moods and our phones. It's not quite the same, but it kind of is. I mean, there's this interesting idea of like when you put so much responsibility on technology that we seem to lose something, I guess, of like our humanity. And I feel like one of the problems with the story is that they're just abdicating all relationship. Like if the house takes care of all the nurturing and the house takes care of everything, what are you going to do? Like, it's great that she doesn't have to cook and clean, but she talks about how she thinks too much. But that extra time, like you're playing with the virtual reality, like video games with your kids, Lisa, then they're interacting with each other. I feel like in this situation, they're so reliant on the technology that, yeah, they don't understand quite the difference between reality and fiction, but maybe they understand it too well, because the house and the nursery become mother and father. The relationships are gone. They're not doing these things in relation to anything except the house. Like, I can't comfort you because the house is already going to do it. And I feel like once those aspects of human relationship are being taken by something else, how do they interact with each other? And ultimately they have to call the psychologist in, and of course he can't save them. but it's like the breakdown of their relationships, not necessarily the fact that the house vacuums, if that makes sense. I feel like I might be circling the point I'm actually trying to make, but there's something in the story about technology like controlling them in such a way that they lose those human aspects of relationship. And not, I'm not saying that the children aren't necessarily murderers, but like they've grown up entirely in this situation. They don't understand what a regular house would be like their parents do. And so there's like break with having typical mother, father, child relationships.
Well, you took part of what I was going to say, like right out of my mouth, but thanks for saying it for me. Probably better than I was.
I
going
automated
to.
it. Yeah.
Yes.
Took it
Yes.
for you.
Well, I was just going to draw out on that point a little bit, though. I mean, I think at the end of the day, both in our real world and in the story, the technology itself is benign. It's how it ends up being used or not used or used as a replacement for other things that's really where things start to take a turn. And like you said, Lisa, playing virtual reality games with her children is fine. If she used just the virtual reality headsets to raise them while she did other things that she considered more important, I mean, I think we would already say, well, that's a bad mother. I mean, there's people that do that now, where they just shove an iPad in front of their kids and go about their day. Um, these are the sort of people that George and Wendy seem to be more like. They're off doing whatever, thinking or working or whatever, but it's not that the house is cleaning itself, it's that the house is raising the children for them for the most part. And so the children themselves really don't, I mean, it's the idea of civilization is the point of raising children the way we do, because things like morality are not innate. Things like don't murder your parents with holodeck lions is not something that you're born with. And in fact, if you've grown up in this very selfish, self-indulgent environment where your needs are met and anything that's an impediment to your wants can be gotten rid of, well, then get rid of mommy and daddy because the nursery is more fun. So, I mean, that's a kind of morality that a parent would be teaching their children, even indirectly by having an actual relationship with them, rather than this. I don't even want to say amoral, because that assumes that it has no morals, but like the nursery itself is literally benign. It is just a thing, and it's not capable of substituting real human interaction. And as you were saying, Mel, relationships. I mean, yes, you can go visit Africa, you can visit wherever, you can visit Neverland if you want, but it's always an approximation. Even if you're not looking at lions, you're actually having humans. Those aren't real humans. They're an approximation of a human. And that's not going to give you what you need to actually exist.
Yeah, I love how you pointed out too that these are just creations of, the mirrors and the lights and the computer that's in the nursery. But there's also like the psychologist talks about how there's some sort of, I guess this is the weirder science fiction part, some sort of correlation between the children's mental states and the nursery as well. And so, yeah, I mean, I think you're right, Matt. Like without a structure to guide the children's behavior, and the children are called Peter and Wendy too, which I guess is like a Peter Pan idea, but that they just retreat into fiction, I suppose, or like, kind of children's world. But at the same time, it's dark because without the structure that you're talking about, without the parents raising them in a certain kind of way of looking at the world, like you said, don't use holodeck lions to murder people. They're like their ids, like their desires, everything is just going to be, I'm going to get what I want. And if I don't get what I want, like you said, it's an obstacle that has to be taken care of. And there's this one part in the story, I was paging through and trying to find it. I cannot remember precisely where it was, but the children are kind of like muttering to the room something to the effect of like, don't let them turn this off, don't let them, yeah, they're talking the house. When the parents are going around turning everything off because they want to try living without it for a while, the children are not talking to the parents, they're begging the house not to allow the parents to turn it off, like the house is a living thing. And I think that's another aspect of this too, is not just that they lack moral guidance. So, if somebody's an obstacle, whether it's your parent or the psychologist, you kill them. They also have like placed all their trust in the house because the house gives them whatever they want. And so these are approximations of animals and people, and the house is literally just like machines doing everything for them. But the children, because they have no relationship with the parents, have formed this kind of strange relationship with the house as the parent. And if the actual parents aren't doing what they want, then they'll get the parents, the house's parent, to kind of do what they want done. And I don't know, I think that's kind of disturbing too, is that the two children are putting all their faith on the virtual reality, on the approximation, because that's what gives them what they want. That's what gives them what they desire. They have like no real relationship with the parents other than, you told me no, so I'm going to pitch a tremendous fit that's going to traumatize you or whatever. You told me no, so I'm going to, basically continue to concentrate on your death until it happens, using the thing that I think of as my actual parent. But, I mean, that's not a relationship either. So I don't know. I like that idea of not only like the lack of structure for them, but that they start like placing almost like their faith in a thing that's not even human, because that's the thing that they associate with relationship and nurturance.
Yeah, I think this story really gets to some deep fears that we still have today, which is, I think, why we're talking about Ray Bradbury as being one of the masters of this kind of genre. I'm considering this story originally appeared in 1950, and here we are in 2024 talking about it. And it's so much. I think number one, it like hits at this idea, Matt, you were talking about like the iPad kid that is a phenomenon today, I think. And it's different than children being raised with this kind of technology because it is inevitable. Like, speaking as a parent, there's no way around it. I look at my kids, and my youngest was in kindergarten when the pandemic hit and schools closed down, and he went into like a year and a half of virtual classrooms. I mean, so literally his interaction with his teacher, with his classmates, with everything. And that was, I mentioned he was in kindergarten just because that was like, and I say he was in kindergarten because that was really all he knew about like school and interacting with his classmates was through a screen for a while. But I think that kind of thing is very different because, as you mentioned, Mel, there is like that social component. So he began to understand that, but he also had like his socialization with like us, his parents and his brother. And, we had the home environment that was very different. But when we talk about like the iPad kid, I feel like that's something very different because it's something that like you associate with a child who cannot function without a screen in front of them, who doesn't know how to interact properly with people, or if you take it away, they're going to throw an epic fit, which is exactly what happens in this story. The thought of losing access to the screens, of losing access to the technology, absolutely makes the children lose their minds, essentially. I mean, it's very, I think, telling that we're still kind of dealing with that today. So that's like one thing. But then there's the other thing that I think is really fascinating with this story too, that I feel like we need to talk about, is just how well Bradbury, like, he digs into the psychology of it very well. I think he anticipated that very well, but he also, just the pure horror of this, because there's a couple of things in this story that I want to point out that still chill me every time. One of them is when the father says, I don't imagine the room will like being turned off. Nothing ever likes to die, even a room. This idea of, if you try to turn off the technology, it's not going to like it and it's going to somehow retaliate, which is an absolute benchmark of really good sci-fi horror. I think there's a lot of, what was it? Resident Evil played with that like a lot, with this idea of, oh, don't turn off the computers. It's not going to like it. It's going to go after you. So that I think is really well done. And again, in the 1950s, I think he really anticipated it. But also, the idea that when the lions finally do get the children, or get the parents in the way the children have like intended for it to happen, when the parents realized why the screams they were hearing sounded so familiar, it's because they were hearing their own screams just in the virtual world. They were kind of hearing it play out before they knew what it was, which every time I read that, it gets me. And I think about how just absolutely chilling that must be, to realize, not only that you're about to die, but it says, Mr. and Mrs. Hadley screamed, and suddenly they realized why those other screams had sounded familiar. Like, that is so that's so frightening. So there are some really good moments of like horror, just pure horror in this story.
I'll be really quick. I was going to say that creeped me out too, because it doubles down on the idea of premeditation, because the kids aren't just like, we're mad, the lions are going to kill you. They've been practicing with holograms basically of the parents. So they've been watching the murder of their parents over and over and over again until the moment when they trick them into coming in the room and end it. And so, yeah, I mean, it's creepy all the way around, but the fact that the children have been preparing for this moment is also just really disturbing to me. Matt, go ahead.
Oh, I was pretty much just going to echo what you just said, that the line itself and the realization of the familiarity of the screams because it's your own scream is just, well, I mean, it's just chilling and horrifying. and to your point as well, Mel, that the kids have obviously been practicing this, or if not practicing per se, at the very least they've been enacting it virtually so much that they know how to get the lion to eat their parents. And so, I mean, it's very ambiguous if they were using this as quote unquote practice, or if they were watching it as sort of, I don't know, anger relief, catharsis. But either way, it's obvious that they had been thinking about killing their parents in some form or fashion for some time now, and that's just yeah, I mean, that's just creepy. And yeah, I was even, to kind of jump back as well, just going to add that, like, another pop culture character that comes to mind very similar to these kids and what we've just been talking about is Veruca Salt from the Willy Wonka movie and stories. I mean, that's somebody who's never really been told no, and when they are told no, they pitch a fit until they get told yes, and that's what these kids are in a nutshell. I know that Willy Wonka came out after Bradbury wrote this, but I think that's just another touchstone to kind of, like, this is what I think the technology, and I don't want to imply that Bradbury was writing it this way because this is my interpretation, but it certainly feels like it had some intent there, that the technology itself is not completely the cause. It's the parents not parenting the kids, that and giving in whenever the kids pitch tantrums. Like they mentioned several times, the kids getting punished like in the month prior before the story started, and the kids had such a meltdown that they ended the punishment early rather than see it through to the full conclusion that they had originally established. So yeah, but I guess to bring it all back, hearing the sound of yourself screaming just before you die, yeah, no thanks. I think I'd prefer not to.
You know, I agree. I don't want to ever hear myself screaming ever, but I certainly don't want to have a weird deja vu moment of myself screaming. No, everything you were saying, spot on, Matt. I think Bradbury is saying that it's exactly like technology is there. It depends on how we use it. Um, the part that Lisa emphasized about the father wondering if, you know, nothing wants to die, not even a room or something, like the room doesn't even want to be turned off. That struck me as really interesting because it could be part of the a paranoia that's happening to the parents as they realize, well, I don't know if they ever truly realize what they've done. Maybe they do when the psychologist comes, but realizing something's going on. Because they kind of blame the technology and they're like, let's just shut this all off and everything will be better. But that's not the case because the kids have already, you know, been spoiled. But there's like this slight weird edge to it that there's this technology that we don't fully understand. And what could it mean? Because I would imagine the nursery holograms are not supposed to be able to hurt anyone because it's for kids. And there's no explanation, like I mentioned earlier, with the safeties off. You know, Star Trek nerds would know what I was talking about there, but that's never described. So I think there is like a weird, like it goes a little further than it should have because the technology, you know, it picks up on the kids' thoughts, but actually murders. And that's like the weirdness of the story. But it also reminded me a little bit of Westworld. When we talked about Michael Crichton's Westworld, that was adapted to screen. And the point in the movie when they think the robots might actually be, it's never clear whether the robots are like becoming sentient or not, but they're doing things that they're like not supposed to do, but they can't figure out why because they had the computer and the robots like creating more robots. So like they don't even know how they work. And I wondered if Bradbury was like just poking at that idea of when technology is being developed really quickly. Once you can create like an automated house, like what does this mean? And yeah, even though technology isn't the problem here, could it be in the future? I thought that was interesting. Okay, well, I guess on that terrifying note, I'm not sure what else we can add. Listeners, if you've read The Veldt, we hope you enjoyed our conversation on it. If you haven't, you can find it online. So check it out. It's very creepy. And I think, as we've been mentioning, for a story that was published in the early 50s, it has a lot to say, I think, about even our struggles with technology and social relationships today. We're at No Fear Cast on Twitter and Instagram, and we have a Facebook page. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we're doing, please consider supporting us on Patreon, or you can simply rate and review us, which is entirely free and helps other listeners find us. Theme music by Nicholas Gasparini, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.